The views and opinions expressed on the Healthcare Advocate Show do not necessarily represent the views and opinions of Connoisseur Media or its advertisers.
Revolution Healthcare Radio is brought to you by Home Helpers of Connecticut, in-home senior care services, and Protein Sciences, the creators of Flu Block, a safer, more effective flu shot.
It's Revolution Healthcare, the show that keeps you in the know about the ever-changing healthcare system. We all need answers to our many questions about health, and the revolution in healthcare, presented by Patient Advocate for You, making sure that your healthcare is coordinated properly. And now, here is Sharon Gauthier, taking your calls and sharing information. 1-888-574-2723. 1-888-574-2723.
Good morning, everybody. It's such a nice Saturday out there. It's hard to believe that it's December. Welcome to Revolution Healthcare Radio. My name is Sharon Gauthier. I'm a registered nurse. I own a care management company. We actually started the show because we deal with all kinds of healthcare issues, navigation issues, and just people in general trying to organize their lives over a crisis that might happen. And I honestly feel as a nurse and as the practice that we're in, that the whole healthcare system is in a revolution, which means change. I'm very happy to have with us this morning Michelle Seagull. Michelle and I first met with the Connecticut Women's Council, which is a group of professional women that I've belonged to for about 4 years now. And Michelle is the Deputy Commissioner of the Connecticut Department of Consumer Protection. She also graduated from Harvard Law School, and although she doesn't practice as an attorney in that Consumer Protection Department, I think having that law background is certainly a benefit. We're going to talk about medical marijuana today. Last year, the law had changed in Connecticut that medical marijuana was legal, and there was a lot of controversy about passing the law. The legislature had been involved with wanting to do this for a number of years, and it finally passed. So Michelle and I today are going to discuss the law itself. She's going to tell us a little bit about what the Connecticut Department of Consumer Protection does, which is a huge organization and manages a lot of things. And we'd also like our listeners to please call in with any questions or concerns you might have. Our number here is 888-574-2723. So good morning, Michelle.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on.
Oh, I'm so happy to have you on. Actually, Jonathan Harris and I go way back, who's now the commissioner, when he first entered the legislature after being the mayor of West Hartford, because he was on the public health committee. And at that time, I was just finishing up my graduate degree and had done my practicum at the legislature. So I was in front of that committee often with testimony. And now he's the commissioner. But you've been the deputy commissioner for a while.
Yeah, so I've been with the department for about 4.5 years now.
And so tell us a little bit about consumer protection, because I think people don't really understand what falls under that department. You know, we think it's a place that if the painter comes and we do a contract and, you know, he doesn't paint our house, that we can call consumer protection and you'll see whether or not they're licensed. But it's so much more than that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we certainly do deal with home improvement contractors, and that's one piece of what we do. And we have a complaint center where we try to help consumers who are having disputes with businesses. But we're also responsible for drug control in the state. We license all the pharmacists and pharmacies in the state, and that's how we ended up actually being responsible for regulating the medical marijuana program in Connecticut. Medical marijuana is being regulated like other controlled substances. In addition to that, we're responsible for liquor control, so we regulate that area of business. We have weights and measures in a food division who regulate those parts of the state, so it could be heating fuel oils, it could be, when there's food recalls, things along those lines. So we do that. We do some product safety work. We manage the lemon law program for the state. So it's really a wide area, not to mention licensing, not just home improvement contractors, but about 220 different types of occupations, professions, businesses.
And I've noticed on Facebook lately that the department and Mr. Harris himself has been putting a lot out there with Christmas coming, having to do with consumer protection and toys and people being careful about sales and whatnot. And that's kind of new. I've not really known the department to be that out front. Is that a new initiative or?
Somewhat. We've tried to be, but we've become much more aggressive in that regard, and we have someone who's really focusing a lot on our social media outreach, because consumer education is also a big piece of what we do. So while we want to help people after there's a problem, what we really prefer is to have fewer problems to begin with. And, you know, to us, a success is not how many complaints do we resolve, but how many fewer complaints are there out there, because people now are making more informed decisions in the marketplace. So we're definitely trying to take advantage of social media and other avenues for getting information out to consumers so they can make those better informed choices from the beginning and maybe avoid some problems. And one other area I forgot I should mention that we regulate is we regulate legalized gaming in the state. So the lottery and the casinos are also under our purview.
That's a big job across the board, and I think so little is understood about exactly what you do, because like I said at the beginning, I think most of us kind of understood that, you know, if we have a contractor come in, we would complain to you, but that's kind of where it ended with most consumers. So I do want to say that I've certainly noticed that social media piece of it working, and that I see a lot more information out there. So I congratulate the department for doing that, and I certainly share that with all of the followers that we have. So today we're going to talk about the medical marijuana, and has it been a year yet or not quite?
It's actually been a couple of years since it became legal. And the way the program was set up is initially the department was required to set up a registration system for patients. And this was, I think, a compassionate decision by the legislature that to the extent there are patients who are sick now and who are perhaps self-medicating, at least let them get registered and get that legal protection, even while it took some time for the industry itself to get up and running. So the first thing, shortly after the law passed, we created a patient registration system, and patients began registering. And then it took, after that, about a year to get the market itself sort of ready, and that we had a draft and then have regulations approved. So once we did that, then we had to put out a request to identify the businesses that would grow and sell the marijuana. And so that was a process itself. We did this competitively. So unlike other states where you may have hundreds or even thousands of people kind of in their basements or in small businesses growing and selling marijuana, ours is much more mirrored to a controlled substance industry where we put in a lot of safety and other protocols in place so that it's being managed like other drugs you may take if you are seriously ill. So that took some time, both for us to put out the RFP, for people to respond, for us to select who the licensees would be, and then they, of course, needed 6 months or so to get their businesses up and running and product growing.
So an RFP for our listeners is a request for proposal. And
correct.
The state of Connecticut, that's okay. The state of Connecticut and most states and towns will put out requests for proposals, to be fair, for people to actually, and there's a strict guideline for those proposals when you see them, to then put in a proposal to the state of what it is that they would be offering in order to open up the dispensaries. So there's dispensaries and there's growers, right? Is that the two factions, or?
Right, that's correct. So we have growers, and we call them producers in this state, but they're the ones who grow and manufacture the products. So in addition to literally growing the plants, they're manufacturing a lot of products. So there's edibles out there, there's some capsules, there's different types of vaporizer products, there's these things, there's tinctures, there's a lot of different ways now that you can take the product besides sort of the traditional smoking it. So that's really what the producers do, and there's 4 of those in the state. The dispensaries are essentially your pharmacies, and there's 6 of those right now. We do have another request for applications to come in. We want to pick 3 more dispensaries, and these are the retail places. This is where a patient goes, buys their medicine, and that's where that interaction comes in. And so it's important in that area in particular for us to start having more geographic dispersion so that there's more convenience for patients and things along those lines. And that's an area we want to make sure is competitive to get the best consumer benefit there.
So although there is this sense that everyone who is ill can get access, and the sense that everybody's going to be smoking behind their building when they're at work at break, the culture and the sense out in the community is interesting to me. Last year, in the Metro Hartford Alliance group that I happen to be in, I wanted to bring in and introduce to the group the fact that I thought having one of the dispensaries that had just started to open up out in South Windsor, that we had contacted to find out more about process for some of our clients. And when I mentioned that across the room, I got giggles. And I found that very disturbing because, unfortunately, there's still this sense behind closed doors that, everyone's going to be high, and that's the reason why they're getting it. And we're New England. I have to reinforce the fact that this is New England. I did have conversations after that particular meeting with people who were extremely disturbed that I even brought it up. And as you know, I tend to bring up a lot of subjects that are controversial to bring out in the open. So we have well-educated people out there who still have this feeling that, everyone's going to be smoking behind closed doors. What do employees do now that get the drug testing done and they're positive? So when we come back from our short break, let's talk a little bit about that. We're certainly not going to change the culture, but I think that still is sustained out there by a lot of people, and they don't understand the need for this medical marijuana, which is a totally different product. Our number is 888-574-2723, and we'll talk to you shortly. Home Helpers is a franchise in Connecticut, and what I was impressed with Home Helpers is their passion for what they're doing. We worked with them in the past, and we recommend them to our clients.
Are you looking for senior care for an aging parent or loved one? Are you a new mom or working parent who could use an extra hand? Let Home Helpers of Connecticut make your life easy. Get a free consultation. Call 860-698-2244 or find the nearest office at homehelpershomecare.com.
Uh-oh, flu season again. Time to get a flu shot. You now have a choice in flu vaccines. You can ask for Flu Block.
It is the healthy individuals that carry and spread the flu. Every year, about 30,000 Americans will die as a result of the complications of influenza.
That's one of the reasons why I had an interest in it, is that our population, that our service tends to manage, our elderly. People were having to get a booster with the flu vaccine. What I liked about Flu Block is that the people last year in our group, the clients of ours that got the Flu Block vaccine, did not get a booster, and they did not get the flu. And the people that didn't get the Flu Block vaccine either got the flu in addition to getting the vaccine, or were told by their physicians that now we had to try to create a process for them to get a second vaccine.
The next time you get a flu shot, ask for Flu Block, the pure choice, because you have a choice in flu vaccines.
Welcome back, everybody, to Revolution Healthcare Radio. This is Sharon Gauthier. I am your host, and with me today, I'm very happy to have Michelle Seagull, who is the Deputy Commissioner of the Connecticut Department of Consumer Protection, and we're talking about medical marijuana. Our number is 888-574-2723. So, Michelle, before our break, we were talking about the culture, and, unfortunately, we're not ever going to change that, but with a group of, middle-aged people, well-educated people, I was really taken back by the reaction to it. And I guess it was a moment that I really realized, wow, we really haven't gotten to a point yet that people are accepting the fact that medical marijuana is different than the guy you're buying marijuana from down the street. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the product itself and the people that qualify, and how do they do that?
Okay, so first, in terms of the products itself, it's definitely coming in more and more different forms, much of it much more medical looking and something that you would see. So I mentioned there's capsules now. They're they're sublingual strips. They're kind of like a Listerine strip where you could put it under your tongue and absorb the medicine that way. There's some topical ointments. There's a lot of people will use a vaporizer, and so that's not sort of the same sort of smoking where you get that odor and that process. So it's moving more and more, especially as more patients start registering who maybe are not as used to the product and are open to different ways of taking it, and as patients experiment with what works for them better. So we're definitely seeing a change away from just smokable forms to other forms. In terms of qualifying, it really requires some serious medical condition, and there's some extremely sick patients out there who are getting it, whether they have cancer, AIDS is an example, wasting syndrome, so MS. These are serious medical conditions that people have. So it is what we're hearing from the dispensaries who are selling it, sometimes in talking to patients themselves, is they're really seeing some significant improvements that they weren't experiencing with their traditional medications.
Now, you just can't go to the dispensary like you would CVS and say, I'd like some medical marijuana. Like you said, that there is a process, and that process, if you can talk a little bit about that process.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way the law is written, doctors don't prescribe marijuana the way they do a traditional medication. What a doctor will do is certify to the Department of Consumer Protection that their patient has one of these conditions that qualifies for marijuana, and that in their medical opinion, after having kind of done an assessment, is that the benefits of marijuana they think will outweigh the risks. And
so the conditions, excuse me for interrupting, but the conditions that you talk about qualifying for, that's strictly up to the physician. You don't particularly have a list that they have to go under?
No, there is a list in the law, and it lays out 12 conditions that qualify for medical marijuana. And so that's, I probably wouldn't be able to say all 12 right off the top of my head, but cancer is an example of one of them, definitely. AIDS is an example. So there's different ones. MS is one, exactly. Wasting syndrome is one. So these are serious medical conditions. Post-traumatic stress disorder is one as well. So the physician would have to first certify that the patient has one of these qualifying conditions, and there's a process for conditions to get added through regulations, and we have a board of physicians that makes recommendations through a petitioning process. So there may be some added that way as well. But so the doctor just certifies for us that this is a person who qualifies for medical marijuana because I've diagnosed them as having one of these conditions that qualifies, and because they, I think, will benefit from it, having done my medical opinion. Once they certify to that and a few other things, then the patient can log in and they'll register with us. And that is basically they have to prove that they're a Connecticut resident because of the federal issues. This is a purely intrastate product and regulation. So they have to prove to us that they're a Connecticut resident and that they're 18 or over are really the two things we're looking for there. And then there's they would send that information to us along with a picture, and they would get a card from us that would have their picture on it, and that would show that they've been registered as a medical marijuana patient in Connecticut. And with that card, they can then enter the dispensaries and purchase product.
Okay, I'm going to have Christian look up those 12. Would they be on your website?
Yeah, absolutely. If you go on to our medical marijuana, we have a whole page devoted to the program.
Okay, good. So talking about the qualifications, I think, is important, but also I think that the other idea that people need to understand is that this product isn't a smoking product. 95%, if not 100% of the time, it's a product that's either a pill or a vapor or a cream. No, it can be a smoking product too.
Yeah, absolutely. There's still raw bud product being sold in the dispensaries. We hear different amounts, but probably about half of patients are still tending to buy it in that form, although, depending on the dispensaries, and it's changing over time, it could be more or less. But
so how do you think the physicians in Connecticut are accepting this? Like, I know Dr. Cost was really in the forefront of a lot of this in the original discussions, and then when it came forward. Dr. Cost is a pain management physician. His expertise is pain management. His background is anesthesiology, or an anesthesiologist. And I actually use the Hartford Pain Clinic a lot for my clients because your primary physician is extremely resistant, if not totally not wanting to give any of my clients that generally tend to be elderly any kind of pain management at all. And as you get older, you do have pain issues. So they have a wonderful They have a wonderful practice over Blueback Square and lots of ways of managing pain, which that is one of them. And I think that, as we're looking up, did we find that, Christian? Okay, so I'm just going to review with you guys, you guys, our listeners out there, the 12 debilitating medical conditions that are included in the state of Connecticut as being qualifiers for the medical marijuana. Again, our number is 888-574-2723. If anyone would like to call with a question, this is your opportunity to bring forward either your opinion, your questions, or your concerns about the medical marijuana law in Connecticut. So cancer is the number one. And, of course, people who have cancer often have pain issues. So that would be considered a qualifier. Glaucoma, everyone knows. And for years, people, who were in their 20s wanted to get diagnosed with glaucoma so they could have access to marijuana. That's a very well-known condition. Positive status of HIV virus or acquired immune deficiency, AIDS. So HIV and AIDS, which are two really different components in a way. You can be identified with HIV and not have AIDS. AIDS tends to be the end stage of HIV. That's another qualifier. Parkinson's disease, which a lot of people do suffer from, and we have a lot of clients that suffer from Parkinson's disease, which again is a very debilitating disease and certainly addresses function. Multiple sclerosis, any damage to the nervous system or spinal cord. So I would guess that any of your spinal cord diseases, which there are several of them, would be a qualifier. But again, that identification of that would come from your physician. Epilepsy. Cachexia. So cachexia is really the wasting syndrome that Michelle was talking about. A lot of and wasting syndrome is also another diagnosis. They're two different diagnoses, but yet they are similar. Crohn's disease, and my husband has Crohn's disease, so that is, again, a very painful disease. And if I knew years ago that this was something that would help him, trust me, I would have been out there rather within the prednisone he was on to get this for him. And post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, of course, is a huge issue amongst our veterans, and so that is a qualifier. So the list is pretty detailed, I think. And Christian, if we could go back to, if we could go back to the list of places in Connecticut that you can get them, then I would I'd be happy to tell people. So anybody who's interested in this can actually go to the Connecticut Consumer Protection Department, and there is a whole page, correct?
Right. So if you go on to our website, on the top bar, there's programs and services. If you click on there, it lists all the various different programs and services with kind of under the Department of Consumer Protection. One of those options is the medical marijuana program. Once you get into that part of our website, there's really a lot of information about the program. So you can find the list of dispensaries. You can find what's required to qualify as a patient. You can find all sorts of different information on there. So definitely, if you want to learn more about the program, I would encourage people to do that.
So again, our number is 888-574-2723. I'd like to say hello to Dot. She's one of our regular listeners out there. Dot is in her 80s, and I'm sure she's just falling off her chair right now in that age group thinking about the fact that we're talking about medical marijuana, but maybe not. Sometimes you're surprised. So I'm going to wait more till the end of the show to give us a list of the places that we're going to be going to. So we're going to continue that conversation with Michelle about medical marijuana. So we have the process for people to register, and now that they registered, they, like you said, they have to be a
Connecticut resident.
A Connecticut resident. They now have this card. They have this connection with the physician. So then what happens at that point? Does the physician actually give that person a prescription?
No. So the physician's job is done, if they want it to be, after they've certified for us that their patient qualifies for the medical marijuana program. Now, our expectation and hope would be that physicians will continue, that this is the bona fide physician for the patient, and so they're going to continue working with the patient on this medication because it hasn't kind of gone through the types of testing that traditional controlled substances have, there is a degree of trial and error. And so at our dispensaries, all of the dispensaries, it's a licensed pharmacist who's working there. So they also work with the patient, finding out what sorts of dosing works best for the patient. And all of our products are lab tested and labeled with active ingredients in the state. So through that, get to there. And we would expect and hope for physicians to be engaged in this process as well and sort of understand how is the medical marijuana, how is my patient reacting to that? And we're actually finding, for example, a lot of patients are able to cut back or completely eliminate a lot of other drugs that they're taking, including a lot of opioids that they were maybe taking for pain, because they're finding the medical marijuana is managing their pain sufficiently that they can wean themselves off of a lot of these other drugs. So that's certainly something we're hearing a lot of.
And the opioids, of course, have really been in the forefront of the news in the last couple of years, which has really created the resistance or the complete denial of pain meds from primary care physicians, which I'm sure has boosted the clientele for pain management clinics, which I think is great that they're around there. And usually the first place I go to with any of my clients, rather than even get into a discussion with a primary care physician about managing pain, because they do have a fear of what has gone on in the news. They do have a fear of abuse with the patient themselves, which is hard to control. So before our last break, we were talking a little bit about the resistance from the physicians. I know Hartford Hospital especially was very much in the forefront of supporting this and having multiple groups together to have discussions about this. So my hats go off to them when this first came out. But do you find when you talk about them being involved that they are involved? Are they afraid? Because when we come back from our break, we can talk a little bit about the federal law that is a little bit of a conflict with the state laws. And what we have heard is that the physicians are afraid of that. So is there more collaboration, less?
Well, every physician, of course, is different, but we're certainly seeing more and more physicians becoming open to the program. And sort of, while initially there may have only been a handful of physicians willing to certify patients, now there's been well over 200. We're starting to approach almost 300 physicians who have certified a patient. So there's definitely growing acceptance in that area, or a growing willingness to at least give this a try. In addition, we're doing a lot of work. We have members of our drug control division who are out regularly talking to hospitals, talking to doctor groups, and explaining our program. And I think a lot of people are familiar with the model that's more out west in Colorado or California, where it really is much more of a recreational model, either truly or in practice. And so getting physicians to understand that our products are tested, that they're labeled like other traditional drugs, I think is going to be helpful in getting to that point.
So when we come back from our break, Michelle, we can talk a little bit more about that resistance, and we can talk a little bit more or talk about the fear, because the federal government yet has not come in aligned with a lot of the state laws that have changed, and that's been some of the resistance. And continue to talk to Michelle about medical marijuana. Again, our number is 888-574-2723. We'll be back shortly to talk to Michelle Seagull.
You now have a choice in flu vaccines. You can ask for Flu Block. No actual flu virus is used to make Flu Block. Flu Block protects against the flu. No gluten, no latex, no eggs, no antibiotics, or no formaldehyde. Flu Block is proven to provide broad protection against multiple strains of the flu. The next time you get a flu shot, ask for Flu Block, the pure choice, because you have a choice in flu vaccines.
Home Helpers is a franchise in Connecticut, and what I was impressed with Home Helpers is their passion for what they're doing. We work with them in the past, and we recommend them to our clients.
Are you looking for senior care for an aging parent or loved one? Are you a new mom or working parent who could use an extra hand? Let Home Helpers of Connecticut make your life easy. Get a free consultation. Call 860-698-2244 or find the nearest office at homehelpershomecare.com.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Revolution Healthcare Radio. I am with Michelle Seagull, who's the Deputy Commissioner of the Connecticut Department of Consumer Protection. So we talked a little bit about what the department actually does, which is much more than the painter that doesn't paint your house and we call you with a complaint. But specifically today, and I'd like to have you come back, Michelle, because as you know, one of my many pet peeves is the non-medical home care agencies that I've been on the bandwagon about. And so I'd like to have you come back at some point to talk a little bit about that. I'm actually going to the legislature this year. I have a meeting on December 11th to talk to Peggy Sayers about that, to bring some more some legislation forward to kind of regulate that. But today we're talking about medical marijuana and physicians prescribing them, but they're really not prescribing. Our number is 888-574-2723. So as we were at our break, I was talking a little bit about the resistance because the federal law has not aligned yet with the state laws. And how is it the state of Connecticut has come to a place where there's more comfort with the physicians with that?
Right. And so one thing we're doing, so as I said, physicians aren't prescribing medical marijuana the way they would write a prescription for another product. What they're doing is simply certifying that their patient is one who under the law qualifies. So they'll, I've diagnosed this patient as having one of the qualifying conditions and that they're going to benefit from marijuana. And so that's a way to inoculate doctors a little bit because they're obviously regulated federally as well since they're prescribing controlled substances more generally. And so other parts of their practice are going to have federal oversight to them. So that's one part of the Connecticut law that does that. But the other part of the program that we're doing to try to make doctors a little bit more comfortable is we are trying to regulate this market as other controlled substance markets are regulated so that they do have a comfort level, at least with the quality and the types of products that their patients are taking. And certainly we hope over time there will become more research in other areas. And there has been increasingly some federal guidance and guidelines in terms of enforcement priority that I think are helpful in giving people, whether it's physicians or others involved in the business, some comfort in terms of the federal government has indicated that in terms of enforcement priority, they're less likely to go after people who are in compliance with a well-regulated state program, and that's what we have in Connecticut. So while there's never a guarantee, we've certainly designed our program in a way to as best as we can, reduce risk.
So when we were first researching this about a year or so ago for some of our clients, we connected, and the name escapes me for the one that's out in South Windsor. Maybe you can pull that up, Christian. But we did have great conversations with them, wanting to understand the process of Prime Wellness of Connecticut. So we had met with them multiple times, and I was, I'm probably the only person that grew up in the 60s that never smoked marijuana. I did not know a whole lot about it, but we did sit down and have very healthy discussions about it. And I wasn't aware of how many pieces of marijuana there are, like 109 or over 100. I forget what they call that, but pieces of it.
The cannabinoids and
right.
terpenes, right.
So they can actually pull out of that for the patient specifically what might help them more than another piece. Am I correct?
Right. So this is done by the producers who are, again, the ones who are growing it. But what they can do is they can, through extraction, pull out different components and create products. And the two sort of most common, most well-known and understood active ingredients are THC and CBD. And so, but all of the products are labeled with the different active ingredients that are in there. And then patients can now have a predictable sort of amount of those different active ingredients so that over time they can see which is working better for them. And so, for example, THC is the one that's probably most controversial, and that's sort of what gets people high. But what they're finding a lot is the CBD actually doesn't have those effects, but is really helpful for certain conditions. For example, seizures and those types of issues, the CBD is proving to be really helpful with. And so you can get those benefits, and then by looking at the label, see, okay, what's the mix of THC, CBD, and start calibrating to what's going to be best to treat your condition. And sometimes it may be different at different times. You may need something to help with appetite earlier in the day, something to help with sleep later at night. So it can vary both the the dosing and the delivery system that you want to use at different times to control different symptoms.
So this relationship with this pharmacist is really important for them to be very well educated and have conversations on a continuous basis. So it's not you go in once a month, I assume, and you just get this. There's probably an ongoing, setup with them to meet. And hopefully that patient also goes back to their physician on a regular basis too. So it's probably, a great plan. It's a great team to have together to help this person who has a debilitating disease.
No, absolutely. Every the way the dispensaries work, they all will have an initial consultation with patients when they first come in, and because this product isn't as well known, the dispensaries are really right on the front lines in terms of now they have hundreds of patients coming in with these different conditions, trying different types of medical marijuana, and so they're better able to start seeing, okay, which ones are working better for which conditions, and so they can really work with the patients to get them to a place that's most effective. And that's why it was really important for us in Connecticut that the people dispensing medical marijuana are in fact licensed pharmacists. So they understand how drugs interact with the body. They understand, for example, drug interactions depending on other medications the patient's using. And so having somebody who's knowledgeable on controlled substance generally and how those work was a really important part of the program. It's made it really helpful to have someone who can consult with patients in a meaningful way.
So our number is 888-574-2723 if anyone's interested in calling. So the next thing I wanted to bring up is the workforce. How is that managed in the workforce? Because like for our particular nursing practice that we have, we do drug testing on our employees, and that's a conversation that I've had with multiple other people who also own businesses or run businesses. How is that managed when you have someone who does go for a drug test?
So that's a tricky question. It's certainly the way the law is written, you can't discriminate against somebody based on their status as a patient. But of course, that doesn't really speak to the ultimate question of if they fail a drug test. And so that really, the law, there is a lot of uncertainty in that area. And it's not an area that the Department of Consumer Protection ultimately has any authority over. It's going to have to eventually make its way through the court system and get some rulings on how that interplays. Generally my sense, but it's obviously up to the courts to decide, is that most businesses probably have already rules in place. There's a lot of other very strong, whether it's pain medicines or other medications that people take that can impair them in different ways. I know there's certainly don't, operate heavy machinery after using this on a lot of different medications. So employers, this is not a new problem of employers having situations where they have an employee who is sick and suffering some sort of condition and is taking medication under a doctor's advice that may impact their ability to do their job. So, you're going to have the spectrum of somebody who happens to fail a test because this product stays in their bloodstream much longer than others, and through all the way up to somebody who's using it at work or impaired. And there's eventually through the courts going to have to be some greater guidance. But that's not something, unfortunately, the Department of Consumer Protection, we can't give absolute answers on. So certainly, businesses should be working with their attorneys and employment lawyers and understanding what advice they can give them in terms of where those lines should be drawn.
I would think that the Department of Labor probably would get involved with something like that.
I don't know. It's the law itself is unsettled, so
right.
It's.
Well, and you're right. I think when you do go in for drug testing, they'll ask you up front what you're on. So if you happen to be on a pain med because you were in a car accident, 3 days ago, and they've given you that, then that's taken into consideration. Unfortunately, there usually aren't repeat drug tests done, with my experience working in the hospital environment for years, unless there's someone that apparently appears impaired, and then you do have a right to ask them. But again, they can refuse and ask them, and then a repeat test can be done. So any problems with this, Michelle? Like when it first came out, were there any big problems with it, whether it's with the growers or problems since then that you have faced as a department?
We've had some probably natural growing pains, as it's a whole entirely new industry, and we really, other states are following our model more, but we were really the first to try to regulate this in a really truly medical way. But there was no one specific issue. We really very carefully in our regulations designed a program that was meant to be medical and meant to bring in people who really bought into that idea. And so from there, you naturally attracted licensees and people who wanted to be part of a medical program. And so there is somewhat of that shared vision of we want to treat this like a true medical product. We understand that these are seriously sick patients. And so there'll always be little bumps in the road, and you have that really with any area where you have business and regulators. But I think it's gone relatively smoothly, especially compared to what I hear going on in other states.
Right. Do you have an idea of how many cards are out there?
It's well over 7,000 at this point, registered patients. I think 7,400 around the last time I looked at the numbers. So it's definitely been steadily increasing, particularly over the past year or so, where legal product became available on the shelves for patients.
And people become more educated. And
Right.
again, I really, applaud the healthcare system out there who embraced this, even for ones who were very resistant. I know I brought up Dr. Kloss's name more than once, but he truly was a big driver behind and a cheerleader for this, having run a very good pain management clinic out in West Hartford, where they have a great system for people. And for our clients who are elderly, and some of them are extremely elderly. I mean, I have a gentleman who's 94, who's bone to bone and wheelchair bound, and it was impossible to get any pain meds from his primary physician, and he has now been going to this clinic for 3 years. And although there is no cure for him, what we always looked for was some comfort, and they've given him a great deal of comfort with creams and injections under not ultrasound but fluoroscope to give him some relief. And that's truly the population that we're talking about, not necessarily elderly, but the population of people who really need relief from their disease. And the multiple diseases that we talked about, sometimes people are still working full time and they're managing their MS or they're managing cancer. And if there's relief that can be given to them that is not going to impact them mentally, but be able to improve their functionality, we as a society, I think, are obligated to provide that for them. And I'm very pleased. I followed the legislation and went to many of the hearings, and I have to say that I'm very proud of the state of Connecticut on how they managed this and how they got input from a lot of people. And this is New England, and there was a lot of resistance out there, and this came up in the legislature multiple times before it was actually approved. But it sounds like there's been a really good process in place, which is great. I do want to tell you guys about the dispensaries that are out there. Is that something that you pulled up, Christian? I couldn't live without Christian. So we have Arrow, and again, you can go on to the Department of Consumer Protection, and there is a page there having to do with medical marijuana where you can get this. But we have Arrow Drug or Arrow Alternative Care in Hartford. We have Blue Point Wellness in Brantford. We have Compassionate Care in Bethel, Connecticut. We have Prime Wellness that I spoke about in South Windsor. We have Thames Valley Alternative Relief in Norwich. And then we have a Healing Corner in Bristol.
Just if I can, just to clarify so people know, the way the law is, only a registered patient are allowed into the dispensaries. If, however, let's say you are suffering from one of these debilitating conditions that qualifies for the drug and you're interested in registering, after you've talked with your physician and they've certified you, the different dispensaries have really stepped up and are helping patients with getting through the rest of the registration process in terms of uploading their proof of identity, their proof of residency, and that sort of thing. So I just want to prepare people. You wouldn't be able to just show up to one of these businesses
Correct.
And walk right in the way you could a CVS.
Correct. But if you do happen to go, I do know that they will give you all the information you need for the process.
Absolutely, and I think all, if not most of them, certainly will have websites too where you can learn more about it after, visit our website, definitely. And so there's a lot of information out there that way as well.
So you mentioned that your expectations to do 3 more dispensaries?
Right. And that's basically just based on the patient counts are growing, and so we want to have more, with 6, some patients in different parts of the state have a pretty far drive. So particularly in Fairfield, New Haven County, we find that we don't have enough both competition and kind of geographic convenience for patients. So we're really trying. What we don't want, of course, is an oversupply in businesses that can't sustain themselves. But at the same time, we want to continue to make this market a competitive one, and one that for patients who, getting out of the house and driving half an hour can be a serious burden.
Correct.
For many of these people. So as the patient numbers are going up and we're monitoring that, we want to make sure that the retail outlets in particular where patients go continue to grow to meet that demand and to meet that geographic reach.
So that's really good that there's going to be a few more. Can we talk a little bit about how the regulations, or what the word kind of escaped me, but going back, and how do you make sure that the people that are growing it are growing it correctly, and like your department regulates that?
Right. We have drug inspectors, and this is all part of, so we have an entire drug control division, and we regulate.
Quality control, that's what I was looking for.
Right. So, for starters, we have pretty detailed regulations with regard to what they can or cannot do, and we were very actively involved in working with them as they build out their facilities so that we could be sure they were building them in a way. So, for example, we don't allow, except in very limited circumstances, for example, pesticides. So they all really have to have a different kind of system in place to control for any issues of whether it's infestations or mold or something, because we don't allow them to just spray chemicals all over the place. That's, we don't think, a very healthy thing to have on medicine.
Correct.
So we were very actively first in selecting who was going to even be our producers. It was a competitive process. So as a starting point, we picked people who are businesses that we thought had a very good plan in place to grow the product and to do it the right way. We were very actively involved. These businesses didn't exist. These were empty warehouses or other large spaces sort of sitting vacant in Connecticut that now have these businesses. So as they built out, our investigators or inspectors were there to watch and sign off on it, and they weren't allowed to start growing until we were convinced that they had everything in place in a way where they could grow the product safely. And then, just like you regulate any other industry, you would periodically go in and do an inspection. And of course, if we get feedback from patients, or if we get feedback from dispensaries of problems with products, we would investigate that just as we would any other product we regulate.
Well, that's very good to know. And so the DEA, is the DEA under you guys?
No, so that's
under
a federal
department.
No, that's the federal drug enforcement agency. So that's a federal agency. So we have a drug control division, but that's state.
Okay. That's good to know that there's some regulation there. When we come back from our break, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about cost and whether or not this is covered under insurance. That's always something that people are concerned about, having to sustain the cost of getting yet another medication for themselves, and often the people that are in need of this are in limited incomes because many of them may not be able to work. So when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about that. Right now we're talking to Michelle Seagull. She's the Deputy Commissioner of the Consumer Protection Department, and the Consumer Protection Department in Connecticut are the ones who regulate medical marijuana. I'm really surprised we're not getting any calls about this, but it's a beautiful day out there, so I guess people have opted to go get their Christmas trees. And I certainly will have you come back because there's so many things that we can talk about. And our number is 888-574-2723. You're listening to Revolution Healthcare Radio.
For over a decade, Home Helpers has been making life easier for those in need.
I was very impressed when we first met. So why don't you tell me a little bit about the reasons why you actually got into this?
For me, it's personal. I took care of my aging parents who wanted to stay at home. We actually had a good experience having a home health aide come in and give us respite to make it as comfortable as possible, keep them in control, keep them at home, which was very, very important to my family. Home helpers share that same vision. We picked home helpers because they're extremely strict about the quality of care, the training of the caregivers. They're very serious about putting someone in the home and making sure they're insured, bonded, and well qualified to take care of someone's loved one.
Are you looking for senior care for an aging parent or loved one? Are you a new mom or working parent who could use an extra hand? Let Home Helpers of Connecticut make your life easy. Get a free consultation. Call 860-698-2244 or find the nearest office at homehelpershomecare.com.
You now have a choice in flu vaccines. You can ask for Flublok. No actual flu virus is used to make Flublok. Flublok protects against the flu. No gluten, no latex, no eggs, no antibiotics, or no formaldehyde. Flublok is proven to provide broad protection against multiple strains of the flu. The next time you get a flu shot, ask for Flublok, the pure choice, because you have a choice in flu vaccines.
Welcome back, everybody, to Revolution Healthcare Radio. You're listening to Sharon Gauthier. I am your host, and I am a registered nurse who owns a independent care management company, and we're talking today to Michelle Seagull, Deputy Commissioner of Connecticut Department of Consumer Protection. There's no doubt that I'm going to need to have her come back because there is so much more that the Consumer Protection Department does that we're not aware of. But today we're talking about medical marijuana. I would like to remind everyone that you can go to revolutionhealthcareradio.com. You can get all of the radio shows that we've had, including this one, will be up in the next day or so to be able to listen to for those of you who have missed it. And I was talking briefly to Michelle about social media, that I've noticed that they've been a lot more involved with social media, Michelle, and I know that I really appreciate some of those alerts that come on social media.
Well, thank you. I'm glad people notice. It's definitely where we want to make consumer education and outreach an increasingly, as I said, important part of what we do, because, you know, when we hear about frauds or things that are going on, the faster we can get information out to people, the more people can now hopefully protect themselves. So definitely please follow us on Facebook or on Twitter. We try to get information out quickly through those channels, in addition through traditional or other media.
And what I've noticed is a lot of the fraud alert having to do with gift cards and things that seem too good to be real, and they're short and sweet, which I like. So either Mr. Harris, Commissioner Harris, or someone else will put it out there, and I immediately share it with everyone. So I thank your department for doing that, and will certainly do my best to make everyone aware. So before our break, we were talking about the cost. Is this something covered by insurance?
Right now it is not, and that's specifically part of the law itself. Makes it clear that insurance is not required to cover it. An insurance company could, I suppose, choose to do so, but I'm not aware of any that is doing that now. So it is an out-of-pocket expense for patients at this point. Our dispensaries and our producers do have some compassionate need programs that are coming, that have existed and that, you know, are becoming more fully fleshed out. So there are opportunities in some instances for patients who really are facing financial hardship to perhaps get some sort of discount or other thing, but it's still, it is not covered by insurance.
Do you have any idea what the cost is at all?
I don't know specifically, and it really varies because there's so many different products, there's so many different, both in terms of the active ingredient profile and in terms of the dosage form itself. So it varies across that. Our expectation ultimately, as this becomes a more competitive market, is that what you're going to get some, you know, cost is going to, prices are going to come closer and closer to cost, would be the hope. And we're really letting competitive forces drive that. So my understanding is that the prices have come down from when the program originally came up. But there always will be a cost to this. It's a lot to grow, especially under our requirements that do expect it to be done in a way that's medically appropriate.
And I guess that tells me that I probably have to have one of those dispensaries on here, because I think it would certainly be a great thing to have them come on and talk a little bit about their processes. So right now the cost does belong to the patient themselves, and insurance companies hopefully will look at that. But, you know, insurance companies have such a burden already of what they have to pay for and not pay for. I always find it interesting when I do get involved with discussions with insurance companies that they say to us that they do not regulate health care with a patient. And my comment is you absolutely do regulate it and manage it, because if you're denying something, then obviously you're making that decision for that person. And again, that'll probably be a whole other show that we'll have on insurance companies and what they pay and what they don't and the challenges that they have. So we talked about the cost, and it's not something that they can have covered by their physicians. We've talked about the processes and the many dispensaries that are in Connecticut and the growing process and the fact that the DEA is involved. Are there calls that you get from anyone with concerns about how they're accessing it, that they're having a problem with the pharmacy themselves, or so there's no complaints on that piece of it, or are there?
Nothing that really sticks out. I'm sure intermittently somebody has some difficulty, and it's definitely a different process. Usually you don't have to register in order to buy medicine, and that's simply the nature of the way this product is being regulated, and because of that federal-state sort of divergence. So certainly there's sometimes patients who have trouble understanding the registration process, or there is a delay. We have to verify the documents. We have to create a card and mail it to people. So we'll get some questions about that. But overall, we're not finding systemic issues in that regard. And, the dispensaries really do work closely with their patients on a lot of things.
So we only have a minute left, and I just wanted you briefly to talk about the conflict between federal and state, because it's pretty clear and not really complicated.
Right. So still it is a Schedule I drug federally, which means it's deemed to have no medical benefits. And so it's just an illegal product federally. We've in Connecticut moved it to be a Schedule II drug. And so that allows us to regulate it the way we do other medications. So, for example, there's a prescription monitoring program, which is something not many people may be familiar with, but it's a place where doctors can monitor the different types of drugs their patients are taking, for example, to kind of consider interactions or maybe identify a patient who's been doctor shopping.
So thank you, Michelle. We just have a few seconds left to thank Michelle Seagull, Deputy Commissioner, Connecticut Consumer Protection. Next week we have a physician, a psychiatrist from St. Francis Hospital. If you go on our website, which is revolutionhealthcareradio.com, you'll be able to find out who that is. Thank you very much for listening to Revolution Healthcare Radio, and we'll see you next week. Have a great week.
Coming soon, the Revolution Healthcare Podcast. The people who never talk and the stories that don't exist. The podcast is a more intimate, in-depth examination of the personal challenges caused by healthcare. The focus is on the human aspect of healthcare, from patients and families to doctors and nurses. They all have a story that needs to be heard. The Revolution Healthcare Podcast is available early January 2016. Revolution Healthcare Radio, brought to you by Home Helpers of Connecticut and Protein Sciences, the creators of FluBlock.
Let Home Helpers of Connecticut make your life easy. Get a free consultation. Call 860-698-2244 or find the nearest office at homehelpershomecare.com.
No actual flu virus is used to make FluBlock. The next time you get a flu shot, ask for FluBlock, the pure choice. Because you have a choice in flu vaccines. Because you have a choice in flu vaccines. Because you have a choice in flu vaccines.